Hello, everybody. Right, so this is arguably the um, most important video that I'm going to actually film up on YouTube. Um, it's one of the skills screencasts, specifically how to write a peel. Now, if you are first year and you ask a second year, what's the most difficult part about second year, or what's the hardest part about psychology, most of the time I guess people would actually say how to evaluate, and specifically how to structure a peel. So I'm hoping this video is actually going to plug a lot of that gap. Let me be very clear about this is the most important skill for you to show in the exam. It's also one of the ones, partly because it's most important, but it's also one of the ones that you are actually relentlessly tested on. Across the three exams, to be honest, you probably write something close to 30 to anywhere between 30 and 45 peels, I think. And if you cannot peel properly, you're going to be systematically and consistently marked down, and that's going to have a massive impact on your grade. Uh, I would comfortably say that learning this skill could give you up to 2 grades inflation, if you will, 2 grades difference. But at A level, no matter how many times I say this to students, sometimes I think it goes in one ear and out the other. It isn't just about what you say. It's not literally about what you write. It's not literally about you showing off your knowledge. It's how you do that. It's how you write the words. It's how you structure the points. Let me tell you, I have seen some fantastic points with no structure walk away with next to no credit, because it's one thing to come up with a fantastic point. It's a complete other ball game to be able to structure that point in a coherent and cohesive argument. And I'm hoping this video is going to give you this today. So first things first, okay, this is the basic structure of the peels. I know you've done peels before. But this is an A-level peel if you wish. I don't want you going on your GCSE knowledge, because GCSEs are basically just a memory test, right? A level, there is actually skill involved. So as we know, the point is the first thing. The terminology is slightly different between schools, but I tend to go for evidence. Right? I want you to evidence. I don't want you to BS me or the examiners. The hardest point, and in my opinion, the most important part of the peel, is actually the elaboration, which I'll go through in a second. Before finally finishing with a nice and tidy link back towards the end as well. Now I'm going to go through all four of these in a bit of detail before providing you with two model answers that I've just taken from my slides, basically. So best place to start is at the top, right? Now your point, okay, should only be one sentence. Right? It should only be one sentence. It should not be longer than that. Otherwise, you're not making a point. You're starting to write an essay. It actually has to state something specific, right? So you can't say, stuff like, "Oh, the two process model is not good." Why? Oh, the dopamine of the dopamine hypothesis of schizophrenia doesn't really explain it really well. It doesn't explain what really well, right? So you can't be too vague. There's an example here. A problem with the two process model is that it doesn't explain phobias very well. Okay, that's a point, and it is a point. It's one sentence. Okay, good. But it's vague. So, with your point, there actually has to be some specificity. Now, I haven't written this in here, by the way. I haven't written this in here, but something to actually note down is that whilst you want to be specific in the point you're actually making, you don't want to use any good terminology that you're then not going to be able to use in the elaboration. So for example, if I wanted to say that a theory was reductionist, I wouldn't want to use the word reductionist in the point, because then I can't really use reductionist in the elaboration, and that's where all your terminology is. So instead of saying, the biological explanation for OCD is reductionist, I would say something slightly different, right? So I'd say something like the biological approaches to explaining OCD fail to take into account anything outside of biology. I give evidence, and then my elaboration is a link back. So try to avoid talking about using too many terms in your point, because it means you can't kind of use them later on. Now, it does. I'm going to just go back briefly. Well, I'm not going to go back, but it doesn't actually matter which way round your E's are. But one thing to please note is that your point is literally only one sentence. The link back at the end is only one sentence. The two E's in the middle are the vast majority of your point. So you need at least two sentences for your evidence. So one thing that's worth remembering is that you can either, as part of your evidence, bring in a literal piece of research to back up your point, or it can be what's called a logical speculation, a non research piece of evidence that is factual and logical. And what I mean by that is a non research piece of evidence that makes sense. Okay. I do have an example kind of later on, which I want to show you. It might be worth skipping ahead if you want to find out about that now. But at the end of these slides, I've got a non-research evidence point and a research evidence point. Now, do not fall into the trap of, well, this is pretty much what I just said, but do not fall into the trap of thinking that every single piece of evidence needs to be research. Or a piece of evidence somehow. Your evidence can be research based, or it may not be research evidence based. Just do not make up the evidence. Just don't make up the evidence. Examiners use Google if they suspect that a individual is trying to pull the wool over their eyes, trying to lie to them, and it's incredibly easy to find out whether somebody has. Now, the reason why I wouldn't do this is because if you do get caught doing this by your examiner, particularly on paper 3, they are going to massively scrutinize. They're going to be annoyed, basically. They're going to be pissed off that you've just tried to sneak something past them. And they're going to massively scrutinize and probably be harsher unconsciously on your piece of work. And if you've made up your evidence, no offense, but you kind of deserve it. Generally speaking, the evidence should be at least 2 sentences, and ideally, if you're using research-based evidence, you want to have statistics in there, right? Statistics are a fantastic way of showing that you're not lying. So, 65% for Milgram, for example, 32% for Ash. All these statistics I get bandied around. Oh, yeah. I would know at least one statistic for quantitative data. Now, this is where most people struggle. Students tend to give PELs rather than peels. They're not particularly good at then elaborating on why their point is important, and that's what the elaboration is, by the way. Right? This is where you outline why your point is important. What is a consequence of your point? So, for example, if you were to say, "Oh, the theory is valid," in the point, your elaboration. Sorry, the theory has. If you were to say the theory has research support, give a piece of evidence in your evidence, and when it came to your elaboration, you would go, "Well, what's the consequence of the fact that the theory has support?" Well, it has validity. It's more credible as a theory, for example. So this is a central question just here, which I get my students to think about. If you struggle with elaborations, what I want you to consider: what is a consequence of the point you have made? What's a consequence of it? If you're saying that it's reductionist, a consequence of that is that the theory is parochial, it's narrow-minded, for example. If you're criticizing the theory for being deterministic, well, a consequence of that is that the theory is quite offensive and socially sensitive, for example. So you need to be able to elaborate in detail. But again, this has to be at least 2 sentences. This has to be at least two sentences. It should be as detailed as your evidence, in my opinion, if not more. Now, teachers differ. To be honest, teachers do differ in how they get their students to structure, where they get people to put emphasis. I tend to get my students to put more emphasis on elaboration. I think it's really important, right? And let me argue why. There's no right or wrong reason, right or wrong way. Sorry, but let me go through why I believe elaborating on your point is more important. Examiners are looking for breadth and depth. So for a 16 marker, when AO3 equals 10, I say to my students, you should write 3 peels. Now that's less than some teachers. Some teachers go 4, one or two teachers go 5. I think you can't write 5 detailed, elaborated, and structured peels in 12 minutes. It's just not going to happen, really, in my opinion. So I get my students to write 3 peels that are heavy on the elaboration. And you've got to get used to this. What is a consequence of this point? If you're saying it's another thing, for example, there's if you say, oh, it has practical applications, in your elaboration, you're then going to go, therefore it's useful. Therefore, it's useful in advancing societal benefits and showing that psychology can have a positive impact upon how we live our lives. Boom. That's how you elaborate. And that was off the top of my head. Link back, right? Make sure you link back. And once again, it is one snappy sentence. One snappy sentence. I did have a student in the last year before filming say, put his hand up and said, Kieran, when I write a link back, and he has a good point to be fair, he said, when I have a link back, I feel like a lemon. Or was it a lime? I think it was a lemon. Because I feel like I'm repeating myself. There may be an element of repetition, like with your point, but there is actually a skill to being able to link back without repeating. There is actually a skill. It's crucial that you have the link back here. Categorically, you will not get top, but you may have nailed your AO1. You may have written 3 beautifully structured AO3s in your essay, but you will not get above 12 out of 16 for anything if you haven't linked back to your point. It's a really nice way of tying back. The classic mistake that people do fall into, which I think is really weird, is they combine their elaboration into their link back and they make it all kind of one sentence. They wrote a fantastic point. They give good evidence, short sometimes, but they give good evidence. And then they go, this is important because, and there's no link back. So don't merge. Your elaboration and your link back should be separate. They should be separate. Now, this is what it all comes down to. I've got two peels on first year material. One is a non-research based point and the other is a research based point. And obviously, as you can tell by the title, we're looking at a non-research based point here. These are not the best points I've written. These are just ones I've picked from. These are picked from the slides, but because all of my model answers are in the slides. But this is, in terms of structure, this is really what you should do. Now, I can't remember these points. It was a while since I copied them on, but I'm guessing we're going to have a 1-sentence point at the beginning, and this, in this case, is about explaining phobias, right? Short and snappy. The behaviorist approach to explaining phobias could be described as too simplistic, failing to take into account other culpable influences. What I'm saying there is reductionist. That is basically what I'm saying. But I haven't used the word reductionist because I want to use it later on. So I've rephrased it in a way. This is what we're talking about, skill. A-level is so much more skillful than GCSEs, right? It's not just you remembering stuff that you revised. It's you being able to manipulate language a lot of the time. I think I'm going to go evidence first. I don't actually know. I tend to go evidence first. And I have gone evidence first here. Now, one thing I like to get my students to do is actually always write for example when they're about to give evidence. That way you're signposting, all these are really important skills, you're signposting your examiner to, for example, I'm about to give some evidence now. For example, the environment neglects to account for biological and cognitive factors, instead suggesting that phobias are entirely caused by events that happen to the sufferer. I've not given a single piece of research. My evidence is the theory itself. Right? I'm using the theory itself as evidence for my point in saying that it fails to take into account other factors. Why is this important though? Who cares? Who gives a flying pig? Um, who cares that this is too simplistic? Well, now you need to go into the elaboration. The elaboration, I'm betting, is probably more detailed than the evidence, or well, by technically by about a character or two. It's quite a short one, actually. This clearly suffers from environmental reductionism. Point number one, and limits the explanation to an excessively parochial perspective. Right? At least it is only a partial explanation for what causes phobic reactions. Two sentences have got three evaluative terms in there. Pack your elaboration with evaluative terms, but you actually have to, by the way, the classic mistake that people make is they just throw loads of terms in there without actually really making it about the point itself. You have to use terminology about what it is you are talking about here, right? Use this term phobic reactions. A link back. Therefore, the behaviourist approach should be treated with caution when considering the extent to which it fully explains how we acquire behaviours. Do you see how the link back is different to the point? That's that skill that you have to be able to do. The only way to improve on this is to practice after watching this video. That is literally the only way that I want you to be able to write peels off the top of your head, right? With, by the way, you only having maybe revised this. All of this, with exception of maybe the evidence, all of this should be able to be thought of on the spot in the exam. If you're revising all of this, you're going to fail. Sorry, that's just too much to be able to remember. That's just too much to be able to remember. A non-research based point, which for some reason I haven't actually animated, right? In this case, you can clearly see short sentence, CBT has been shown to work in treating depression. Boom, short and snappy. Where's my evidence? Wiles in 2016 found that over a 4-year period, 43% reported improved symptoms by at least 50%, compared to only 27% who continued the care without CBT, clearly demonstrating a difference in remission rates. Why is this important? Why is this point important? Why is it important that CBT has been shown to work in depression? Well, these statistics suggest that CBT is an effective and a reliable, a dependable treatment path in the long term. Effective and reliable, two evaluative terms. It should be used in conjunction with shorter term strategies such as antidepressants to generate the best outcomes for patients. And therefore, by the way, I always like students to use therefore. Did I use therefore in that one? I did use therefore in that one. There you go. Didn't even notice that. Using therefore is just a nice way to start tying it up. Therefore, it would appear that CBT targets the depressive thinking strategies accurately and should be a primary route of treatment. That is how you write peels, right? This is arguably one of the most, if not the most important videos I will make that you'll watch over the next 2 years. My recommendation would be, particularly if you struggle with elaborations, go back and watch that part again. But that is how you write a peel.